Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode of Unity 2D tutorials. In this episode we're going to create the crouching mechanics using the ground check that we made in the previous videos. Let's go! Now we're going to start do the crouching, which is the bit more difficult than jumping because it includes much more factors. Because the crouching you have to keep pressing it, and other stuff like if you're in a tight zone, you don't want to stand up because there's a wall over your head. So there's a couple of things in here, but it's quite simple if you follow along. For crouching, we're gonna do this thing in here, almost the same mechanics, which we're gonna go here called crouch. It's by default like this, and we're gonna go and copy and paste these stuff in here because they're going to use similar things, not the same. If we press crouch, we enable crouch, right? Otherwise disable it. So we have to create this thing here called crouch and crouch, and make this crouch both. So one thing here, we're going to have an error if we play this game, and I'm going to show you why. If you play it, we're going to have something called input crouch is not set up. So that means we don't have a button saved in the index of the input controllers, which is true. Like if we look in here, we don't have anything called crouch. So what we need to do is we need to make another one. It's basically going to be the same as jump, but we call it crouch. And the button should be, let's go with S. Okay, because I'm using DWSD, you can use other stuff you want. You can use the up and down arrows. It's up to you. So I'm going to use the S in here. I just want to make sure it has the same values, so I have no issues in here. Okay, I think it's fine. We're good. So as long as we have this thing here, we get to be able to see the crouch. Before we move on, I want to disable this thing from serialized, because we finished from the is grounded. We're gonna go and check the crouch just for the sake of it. So if we click crouch, it's enabled. If it's not, it's disabled. And we're gonna do this quite similar in here. Let me region this stuff. Jump and crouch and region. So in here we've handle the jumping, right? So this is the whole jumping part. The next thing we need to do is crouch, and it's simple as checking for lower parts. Like if there's a floor, you can crouch. If not, you cannot. If you release, you go back. But one of the things we need to do about crouching is I created this collider in here that makes us test if we're crouching, so we can go underneath it. Because when we're not, you can see that we have this whole capsule collider in here that's gonna prevent us from going down. So what we need to do, we need to create something called like a standing collider. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the same capsule collider and copy and paste it in here. Let's move it up a bit. So I'm gonna keep this upper one for the whole character, right? But I'm gonna modify the second one to make it go as low as possible. Yep, so this is the second one, the lower one, and this is the upper one. Okay, so basically what's gonna happen is whenever we're crouching, I'm gonna disable this one. So we have more, like have less collider size, so we can go underneath places. What I'm gonna do is, let's do it step by step. Let's reference the collider by calling it collider 2D. So when you write collider 2D, it can be a circle, like a cubicle or capsule or polygon. So this is more general. I'm gonna call it a standing collider, and we're gonna have to make it serializable because we need to reference it in the inspector itself. So this is one thing. Let's go step by step in here, write the whole thing, and then we can see what happens. So if we press crouch, we disable the standing collider And something else which we will do after this is animate crouching. If released, of course I forget something else, reduce the speed, like we have to reduce speed. It depends, I'm gonna go with half. So let's get this thing. If released, resume the original speed and enable the standing collider, and then disable crouch animation. Let me make this in here. So this is the whole stuff in here, but we have to make sure that we're grounded. So we go here and we say if is grounded, and the other thing we have to add here, I'm going to add it and I'm going to explain with crouch flag. So whenever we're grounded and the crouch flag is on, that means we're on the floor and we pressed down, which is S. What we're gonna do here is we're gonna disable the standing glider, that enable equals false. Simple. And let me go down here, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to first disable this crouch. Never mind, actually it should be on by default. So when this thing is on, it remains on through the whole thing, right? Which is not a big deal, which is fine, but we have to actually disable it if we're not crouching, right? So let's have a better, like I can see we have similar things in here. So let's do this thing where we combine both in here. So if I go here and do this and put this thing in here, we can make sure that we have much more optimized structure. So let's go with if crouch flag. So whenever we have the crouch flag in here, we have disabled this and enable it accordingly. So we can have else, and then we have this as true. So when we press down, we disable the standing collider, which is this part, the bigger one. And we don't press down, we resume it, enable it. A much more neat way to do all this stuff is, like whenever we have this crouch, it comes either false or true. So if it's true, that means we're crouching. So we can have this thing here called like this, crouch flag. So if we're crouching, we have to disable this one. If we're not, we enable it. If you feel confused, I mean, you can leave comments below, but this is as simple as this. So if we click this, this becomes true. We come here, if it's true, that means we're crouching. So if we're crouching, we have to disable the upper part, which means we have to make it untrue, which is the back, like the opposite of it. But if we don't press down, this comes as false, which means we're standing. So if we're standing, we have to enable the collider, which means it has to be true, which is the opposite of false. So this one you will save a couple of lines and you will be fine. And yep, so we did this. The other thing we should do is, so we did the crouching, disable the collider, we have to animate, we'll do it later, and we have to reduce. So since we have this thing here, it goes along all the script here, we have something here called is running. We've done it before, like while running, you do a different modifier. But if we do is crouch flag, we have to modify this with something else. So we have to create something called crouch speed modifier. If we go up here, we add this in here as a float, and I'm going to make it 0.5, which is going to bring the whole thing to the half. So what happens in here is we're multiplying with 0.5, which means it's going to be slower. So right now we have done two things. We've made the collider disappear, reduce the speed, and that's all about it. And yeah, if we release it, we resume the speed, which is, it's whatever the speed. This is not gonna get called if it's false, only if it's true. And we enable this, and the crouching animation, we're gonna do it later. So we're quite set for now here, but we need to pass something in here because we have an error. We pass the direction, it's a float, and the boolean of the jump, we have to pass the crouch flag. The crouch flag is basically this thing, crouch. So let's go through this step by step. If we click down, or S, this is enabled, so it comes here. So this is true. If we're on the floor, we disable the collider, and we have a lower speed. That's it. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. So if we go back here, we have to do this thing. So we have to verify which one is the standing collider. So if we enable and disable this one, so the top one is the upper one, the lower one is the crouching one. So we have to drag and drop this one and put it in the standing. Now, so if we're doing good, we should have a proper crouching mechanics. Let's test it. So I'm going left, right, left, right. So you see here, it's disabled by default, right? So it's fine. So if I press S, you can see on the left side, this one has disappeared and this is on. So if I release, this is off and this has appeared. So that's it. So right now what we can do is we can go, so if you move around, there's no animation so we can't see if it's happening, but one thing you can see is the speed becomes less. So that means we're actually crouching. The other thing is, if we're down here, if I release it, we're gonna have an issue. So it actually resumed, so he uncrouched, which doesn't make sense. We're stuck. So we have to make a mechanics here that we can prevent us from getting stuck underneath tight places. So if we go back in the script, we have to do something in here. If we are crouching and disabled crouching, check overhead for collision with ground items. If there are any, remain crouched. Otherwise, uncrouch. Uncrouch. Simply, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to check if we are not crouch flag. What this means is it means two things. Either we release the down button, the crouch button, or we didn't press it at all. So either way, it works for us. What we need to do is we have to check if physics 2D.overlap circle, we have to add stuff in here. So what we need to do is we have to add another object the same as we did for the ground, right? And you have to check, but it's gonna be for the overhead, like on top of his head. So if it touches something that relates to floor, we're gonna go with floor. But if you have multiple, you have floor and ceilings, you can add all these stuff. And then if it does happen, that means we're still touching something on top. So we keep on crouching. Crouch, I'm gonna write this crouch flag equals true. And we're gonna add something in here, and it's gonna be called overhead check collider, which is, you can call it whatever you want, called ceiling, up, top, anything you want. And the second thing we have to do is we have to add a radius for it. I'm gonna call it overhead check radius. Okay. So the first thing we have to do here, we call overhead check collider that position, and we have to pass in the radius, overhead radius, which is 0.2. It's enough. You can make it less if you want. And we have to check only the things that has the ground layer, which is going to be ground layer. So what this gives is we're checking if this happens. So that means if this, it returns anything, that means it touches anything, right? enable the crouch. If you have one line, you can just click here and then put it like this. Otherwise, if you have multiple lines, you can put the curly brackets. So what happens here, let's go to this step by step. So whenever we're not pressing it or we released it, which basically what we built this for, if we released it, we check overhead. If there is anything, if there's nothing, this doesn't get called. We continue as it is and we're uncrouched, so we're standing still. But if there's something, we have to re-enable this thing, okay? Which means we're crouched again. And it will remain on throughout the whole thing until we don't have anything on top. So if we go back to the scene, and we have to get this object. So we have to create the same thing in here, because we have to create a check for the overhead. So if we duplicate this and bring it upwards here, we're going to call it overhead check. It all depends on your collider sizes. For me, like this one, it ends in here. So I want to check if there's anything over this thing here. We'll have to put it too high, so we don't have any problems. So put it here. So that's good. That's good. Let's give it a proper number. 0.1 minus 1.6. It's good. Okay, so what we need to do is we need to reference overhead and put it in the overhead check collision. And we're good. If we're lucky, we're gonna have a proper running walking mechanic with crouching, and we don't get stuck underneath. So if we walk here, see, we can go in, that's fine. If I crouch, it's crouch, release, again. So if I crouch and go in here, if I release, it's still like it's still actually working. But we forgot to actually reference this thing in here, because this is for global usage. But we can see that the crouching is working, like we have the same speed. As long as we go outside, he goes back to running again. That's good. So this thing, that flag is basically, oh, where is it? Crouch. Actually, this should be called is crouched. What I should be called is crouched. And if we keep this as a crouched on, I want to see, do we really need this crouched on? I think we don't need to change it, because yeah, but I think we can just do it here, because whether if I enable it or not, it's just for debugging, it doesn't look good. But this is even if we release this and we make it false, it comes here as a false. In a sense, this is what we need, because if we're pressing it all the time, it comes true, 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 but if we release it, it becomes false. And it should come false, because we're not crouched anymore. And the only thing we have to do is we have to make sure that if we want to use this variable somewhere else, we should call it is crouching. But for the sake of making everything proper, I'm gonna have to make this the same. So after this place, I'm gonna where? Wait, if I do this thing in here, if I make is crouched equals crouch flag, let me see what happens. Did we have any issues in here? Because we might need to check this flag from other scripts for some other reasons, right? Like if you're crouched and you press space, because, you know. But let's see, if you're working, crouching. Okay, that's fine. Only problem is we don't need this. This is gonna make more problems. So for this thing is, I'm gonna rename this into much more better. Crouch pressed. I think it's makes much more sense. So right now we have the crouch, we have the jumping, and I'm gonna minimize this and this. The only thing that we need to do is the animation. So luckily this is the, where is it? We have the crouch animation built in this assets. So all we need to do is we have to go here, animator, let's go to the base layer, open the animations window and create a new clip called fox idle, fox crouch, and it should be looping. But the one thing about this stuff is while crouching, it doesn't really relate in here because it does not work for the this is all for moving standing still. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this stand moving, and I'm going to name this crouch. Just keep it crouch. And what happens here is we want to make sure that we call the crouch with one condition. I'm going to make it boolean crouch. Okay, so whenever we're crouching, so I want to, from whatever state we are at, I want to do the crouch if this is on. So to trigger this, we have to click on this link in here and add this condition called crouch, and it's all should be true by default. So by default we should be walking without any problems, right? But if we crouch in here, we should have this on. But again, in every animation state you have to have an exit. So for exit for this one is you go back to the standing when the crouch is false, which should work fine here. The only thing is we need to enable this from within the script, and that's quite simple as we did last time. So the thing that we should look for is this thing, crouch flag. So the crouch flag we'll do it after we modify all the values of the crouch. So I think is the best play is here. So we go with animator dot set boolean and we name it crouch. We pass the crouch flag. Okay, let's give it a test. Save it, open, and play here. So we can see from right side, let's see, falls down. Okay. Oh yeah, I forget to add stuff in here. That's when you do what? Yep. Yeah. So it should forget this. So it's really fast. Let's make it half a second. So we need actually to add. So we have only 2 frames. But what we need to do is we have to add another frame of this in here, so it looks more of a. See, that looks like he's just crouching. I'm gonna mention one thing after with this test, but it's not gonna be a problem for the tutorial. So if we crouch, see he's crouching, move. This is the problem I was gonna mention. So right now in this assets, in the free assets, we don't have the crouch moving. So this the same thing as in standing. We need to have crouch idle, crouch moving, and we need to integrate this the same as this one. If you have this stuff with you, please do them and then let me know if it works out for you. That would be like your homework. But because we only have one animation which is idle, I only use this one. But for proper usage, you have to create a new blend tree, call it crouch moving, and inside of it you have to have 2 things: the idle and the moving. Because I don't think you can run in crouching. So we have these 2 values with 2 separate speeds, and you have to test the speeds while crouching, as we did before with the velocity, and implement it. But for this current stuff, you can upgrade it as much as you want. This is the basics. So if you walk like this, so like we're actually crouching, if we release it, it's still crouching because that thing is still true. If you can look in here, top left, it's true. So now it's back to normal. One of the things you can notice that when you crouch, it doesn't crouch right away, right? This is fine because this is because of this thing. So we have has exit time, because the exit transition is you have this small amount of thing that transits, and you can do this manually by like a drag. I always have this stuff as an exit time. So if you do this way, we have an exit time of 0. It should be fine. Not really. Yep, these stuff I haven't touched these things for a long time, so it's a fixed duration. So let's make this 0, 0, and then let me just test with these stuff, because I used to play with this like this, bring it up here, and it should be fine. There's a multiple ways of doing this. Yeah. So the exit, so the entrance is fine, the exit is a problem, so we mentioned this thing here, and let's make this 0, disable fixed duration, 0 this out, everything is 0'd, and then we play it. Let's have a final test. Yeah, crouch. You can hear the voice. So it's crouch, 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 jump. Yep, so we're fine. So we have the crouching, the walking, running, jumping. We avoided these issues of getting stuck on the walls, and then avoiding the whole problem of standing up while crouching. And with this we have a nice starting point of the character, but we still need to add more stuff. If you like this video, please leave a like. If you learned something, also subscribe. We're gonna add more videos to this, and in the next episodes we're gonna have a much more sophisticated controller with much more ways of controlling it. And this is it for now, and I hope to see you guys in the next video. Bye bye.